There's a kind of betrayal that needs no knives, no accusations, no backstabbing. It only requires silence precisely timed. And by the time you notice it, everything you once believed in has already been quietly dismantled piece by piece. I'm Bailey, and this is the story I should have told a long time ago. My former company was Linnea Creative, a mid-sized media agency, once the place I thought I'd grow old with. I was the head of content strategy, leading emotional marketing campaigns for emerging consumer brands. The job was demanding, but I loved it. I loved sitting in front of a blank page, turning ideas into something that made people feel cry, gasp, or pause in the middle of a 30-second commercial. I worked there for 6 years, started as an intern with no name, then climbed up one campaign at a time. No one carried me. No one held my hand. I moved forward on my own feet through sleepless nights, building scripts from scratch, through slide revisions at 4 a.m., because the client changed the brief 3 times a week. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, if I stayed kind and humble, I would eventually be seen for who I truly was. I was wrong. The first shock came with a campaign called Light in Memory, the first project I led from concept to execution. From the tagline, "Hold on to the last light of your loved one," to the final scene of a child holding a photo of her late grandmother, every frame was a fusion of my memory and my team's creativity. It was the campaign that brought Linnea its first Clio Award. And the first time I saw my boss publish a post calling himself the architect of the core idea, I read that post in silence. One line stayed with me. We chose to lead with emotion, and I guided the team toward that vision from the very first brainstorm. I sat there holding a cold cup of coffee. My name wasn't mentioned. No link to the video I edited 12 times over 2 weeks. The only name mentioned was Ava, formerly the creative director's assistant, newly promoted to creative lead. She had once texted me 2 hours before deadline, asking, "Do you have a gentle closing line I could borrow?" Now, Ava was the face of the campaign, the leader of Linnea's youthful creative force. I didn't get angry. I just stayed quiet. That night, I remained in the office, opened every old file in my personal drive, reread handwritten drafts, reviewed shot suggestions I had submitted, and the notes I had sent Ava after each revision. Not because I needed proof, but because I needed to remind myself I had truly been there. A week later, I was called into a private meeting. The CEO sat across from me. Ava was next to him. They spoke with the tone of someone announcing lunch hour had moved to 12:30. "We believe your role needs restructuring to better align with our creative direction," the CEO said. What followed was a polite offer to step down into an independent copywriter role, no team management, no involvement in strategic content planning. They called it a flexible shift to help me focus on your craft and avoid the fatigue of leadership. Everything was wrapped in a smile and the phrase, "We still value what you've contributed." I sat there half smiling. In my head, one thing rang clear: I'd been removed, just in a courteous way. I left that meeting with a small box of files, old proposals I knew no one would reference again. No applause. No one walked me to the elevator. Even Ava just smiled and said, "Guess you'll have more time to rest now, huh?" That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I sat in my small kitchen watching the streetlight cast shadows across a glass of orange juice. I felt myself shrink, not because I had been demoted, but because I had been quietly erased from something I helped build. I didn't lose my job, but I lost the value I once held in the eyes of those who saw me as a pillar. I lost faith in the lasting relationships I had tried to nurture within that company, and I understood something: they didn't need to push you out the door. They only had to close it long enough for you to realize you're no longer allowed to walk in. That night, I started writing my name again in a new file, not in bold, not in anger, but with clarity. I didn't know what I would do next, but I knew one thing. The only way not to be erased is to make them look back. Even if it's just once. Not everyone sees the moment they start disappearing. Sometimes it's just a glance that no longer lingers. A meeting where your name is no longer mentioned. A project quietly reassigned without a single word. For me, it was when the logo I once designed, the one I had cherished like a first child, was replaced without anyone asking. I still remember that morning. A system notification popped up on my screen interface update. When the new layout appeared, every trace of the old identity had been wiped away. The colors, the fonts, even the rounded edges of the logo I had spent nights refining. Everything vanished without a trace. I touched the side of my coffee cup, still warm, but my hand felt cold. Cold like Ethan's expression in our last meeting. The same Ethan who had co-founded Woven Studio with me. The same Ethan who once said, "Bailey, you're the soul of this team." The soul I thought. And yet it was Ethan who stayed silent when our new CEO, Lucian, announced the design team's restructuring, placing me in a transition role. No objections, no defense, just averted eyes. I'm not someone who falls easily, but I'm also not numb enough not to feel the sting. I used to believe that in the creative world, effort would be seen, that talent would be heard. I used to think emotional marketing was my strength, and ironically, it was emotion itself that left me undone. In the days that followed, I grew quieter. I stopped posting in Slack, didn't speak up in brainstorms. I no longer stayed late with the team. I just did the tasks I was assigned. Nothing more, nothing less. Then one day, I was removed from the invite list for a major strategy meeting with our biggest client. In the email, a short line stood out, handled by Lucian's team. No reason, no note. I reread that email again and again alone in a room filled with the hum of a fan and the stark light of a monitor. I didn't cry. I just knew this was the moment I had officially been pushed outside the circle of trust. That evening, I stayed out late. Not because of work, but because I didn't want to walk into my own apartment, the one where I'd hung the first mood boards. I parked beside a closed coffee shop and unexpectedly saw a familiar face, Maya, a former mentee of mine. She didn't notice me, but her gaze drifted as if looking back. And in that moment, I realized I was no longer anyone's anchor. No one asked, "What does Bailey think?" No one sought my review before a deadline. I had become a name no one wanted to touch, a quiet awkwardness. I smiled faintly, the smile of someone who realizes she's standing at the bottom. On the 7th day after that email, I reorganized my personal drive. Not because I planned to quit, but because I needed to see what I had left behind after 4 years here. That's when I found the Pulse Emotion Mapping folder, a project I developed late at night during our first year, back when the company was just a few people in a rented studio. I reopened the original pitch deck, reread every line. Nearly no one in the current company knew I was the one who created the customer behavior mapping tool based on emotional data, the foundation for all the campaigns that came after. They had renamed it, rebranded it, and slowly erased me from its history. A gentle kind of theft, but it hurt just the same. I remembered something Ethan once said years ago. Sometimes silence is the only way to keep the project on course. And I agreed. I had been silent. So silent, in fact, that even I had lost my voice. Then a message appeared from Ava, a former partner in the Sleeve campaign. She wrote, "Bailey, can we talk?" They're trying to repitch pulse mapping under Lucian's name, but I remember it was yours. I straightened up. For the first time in days, I felt something stir in my chest. Not anger, but clarity. I replied with just one line, "Send me a time." That night, I printed the original presentation, highlighted every core idea, every handwritten script, insight, and raw data. Each document dated each email, confirmed each note, signed Ava's signature included. I didn't plan to file a complaint. I planned something else. I would rebuild the entire model from scratch. This time not through Lucien, not through my old company, not through any lasting relationship that had already dissolved. I would rebuild through truth. And for the first time in a long, fragmented stretch, I quietly said to myself, if this is the bottom, then it's also the place to push back up. Not every slip makes a sound. Some start as tiny fractures, harmless at first, then spread with every breath. Bailey sat in front of her laptop, the pale light from the window casting a faded reflection on her cheeks. She no longer worked at the agency, yet emails from old clients still came in no greetings, no regrets, just, can you resend the design or access to the old account isn't working. As if she had never been the person behind the project, just an ID, a folder, a name that could be replaced. She didn't respond, not out of pride, but exhaustion. Each morning, Bailey passed by the park near her home. Before she would play podcasts about creative design, jot down ideas into her apps. Now she walked in silence, hands in pockets, head low. The ideas that once surged in her mind now felt like fire with no oxygen left. On a gray Tuesday morning, she received a nameless text from an unknown number. Your campaign video is still running. They haven't removed the credits. She slowly opened her browser, typed the campaign name. The video was still live, but in the credits where her name should have been, as the person who wrote the concept, crafted the script, edited every second, there was only one line created by the Nest team. No name, no role, no trace. The feeling of being erased was no longer just a single betrayal. It was a deliberate kind of removal. Bailey opened a new browser tab. She clicked into her personal archive, opened the original concept files, early days, early drafts. She had logged every step, every creative logic, every alternative plan. All of it was there. Timestamps, email trails, edits, client feedback. She had kept them not out of habit, but out of instinct. Mid-month, she received an email from a freelancer who once collaborated under her. Bailey, I wasn't sure if I should send this, but yesterday during the Nest meeting, they showed a prototype for the Pulse Echo campaign. Wasn't that your personal test project? Bailey couldn't recall how she breathed reading that line. Pulse Echo had been rejected internally for being too emotional, according to Nadia, once her best friend, and later the person who pushed her out of her role as creative lead. Bailey still had the original file, a test video she edited on New Year's Eve alone in her office while the rest of the team went out to celebrate hitting KPIs. They hadn't just reused her idea, they rebranded it, launched it under a new name, with a description, a breakthrough concept by our new creative lead. Bailey didn't respond with rage. She simply closed her laptop, drew the curtains, and sat alone in the dark. There's a strange kind of fear when you realize the thing you once fought to protect, the thing you poured your heart into, is now being used to decorate a system that discarded you. But beyond the fear came something else, clarity. Bailey left the house carrying an old external hard drive. She went to the office of a friend from college, now a lawyer, specializing in creative rights. She didn't say much, just opened the laptop and handed over the file. I need someone to confirm this belongs to me. From the beginning. Her friend nodded. No surprise, no questions. Back home, Bailey sat down and drafted the full development timeline for Pulse Echo, from its first idea, the email replies, the original edits, the handwritten feedback from the client, even the brief, annotated by Nadia. The following week, Bailey attended a creative media forum. She didn't register, didn't come with anyone, just sat in the back row and watched. Nadia took the stage, her presentation connecting content with human emotion in the digital age. The final slide played the Pulse Echo demo, but renamed as Reflex Heart. The audience applauded. Bailey did not. After the session, a journalist approached her, someone who had once interviewed her 2 years ago after a Webby-winning campaign. "I recognize the style," he said. "Wasn't that one of yours?" Bailey looked him in the eye. "Not anymore," she replied. "But it was, in the beginning." That night the article was published. Reflex Heart, Who Really Made It? No accusations, no conclusions, just a question. Bailey didn't share it, didn't comment, but she knew silence was starting to say something. The next morning, the Nest released a press statement. They didn't name Bailey, but they edited the campaign credits, changing it to "in collaboration with Legacy Concepts." No one admitted it, but they no longer denied it. Bailey knew the cracks had begun to spread. The morning light was no different than any other day, but something in me had shifted. I sat by the window of my rented room, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of black coffee, not to wake up, but to stay still. After all the sleepless nights, the unpaid overtime, the looks of pity or indifference from those who once called themselves teammates, I realized something. I would no longer wait for someone to clear a path. I'd build my own. From the moment I began documenting every incident, each time my credit was stripped, every forwarded email that omitted my name from the CC, I no longer felt devoured by injustice. Instead, I started to see the system for what it was, the pattern behind the performance, how Jason stood quietly behind every inflated success, how Kara pretended neutrality while accidentally excluding me from key meetings. I collected evidence not to attack, but to protect. If they ever tried to erase me the way they did others before, they'd have to do it while being watched by the very data I kept. One drizzly afternoon, I arranged to meet Emma, the only person in the marketing team who had ever been honest with me even just once. We sat in a quiet cafe, soft music playing under the clink of spoons in glass. She looked at me cautiously as I opened my laptop and showed her a few lines of data tracking internal system activity by the leadership team. "Bailey, is this real?" she asked. I nodded. No one remembers I still have admin access, but they forgot back when Jason was still deputy director, I was the one who approved access for the entire team. Emma didn't respond. She simply wrapped her hands around her cup of tea as if trying to anchor herself. I didn't need her to take my side. I only needed her not to stand in the way. And that day in her eyes, even if just for a moment, I saw it. She too had been quietly edged out of the circle of trust. I spent the next 2 weeks rebuilding a project proposal I once pitched the real version. Unedited by Kara, untouched by Jason. I built it as if I'd never been rejected. Clear, logical, feasible, and grounded in reality. In the end, I knew I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just needed to deliver what couldn't be denied results. The night before the quarterly meeting, I sent the presentation via email to the executive board. No explanation, just a Google Slides link titled New Direction Real Data by Bailey McKnight. The next morning, I didn't go to the main meeting room. I sat in a small break room a wall away, quietly watching the access metrics rise on my phone screen. The views climbed by the minute. No one replied to the email, but they all read it. By noon, Jason called. His voice was hoarse but still wore its usual calm. "Bailey, can you come meet with Kara and me for a quick chat?" I hung up without answering. 10 minutes later, I stepped into the room. Kara sat in silence. Jason spun a pen between his fingers, eyes fixed on his laptop. "What is it you want?" he asked. I met his gaze. "Nothing. Just for you to stop saying, 'My team built this.' I sent enough evidence, timelines, edit histories. Everyone knows who did what." "This isn't the right time to stir things up," Kara interjected. "The company's in a delicate phase." I smiled. "That's exactly why I sent data instead of a resignation letter." Silence followed, thick as stone. I placed a USB on the table and stood up. Inside is the original analytics file. It includes every instance you removed my name from the Focal Point Project decks. I'm not asking for back pay. I'm not asking for a promotion. All I want is a formal statement that the Bare Focus model was the original independent work of Bailey McKnight. I didn't need their agreement. I didn't need a reply right then, because I knew the weight of truth in data is something they couldn't erase, no matter how fast they ducked. And when the quarterly meeting ended and the CTO himself cited my name in the official roadmap presentation, I knew they hadn't chosen what was right. They had chosen what was undeniable. There was a quiet chill in the early wind. It carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint rhythm of a city waiting to shift. Bailey sat inside her new space, a small studio on the third floor of a creative hub in the West End. Every wall was a sketchboard. Every window welcomed the right kind of sunlight. She was no longer the Bailey from her old company, not the creative director dismissed by a midnight email, not the one who had to watch others nod and take credit for the campaigns she stayed up all night to finish. She was now the founder of Mindsight Collective, an agency known not for its polished brand kits, but for strategies that truly touched people. And somehow she had made her way back, not with noise, but with outcomes. When Mindsight signed its 12th contract, Bailey didn't celebrate. She made herself an espresso, stood in front of the project timeline, and quietly planned the next phase. Around that time, news began to spread of a sudden wave of resignations at her former company. On LinkedIn, 3 of her former team members had left. None gave reasons. One messaged her quietly, "Bailey, if you ever plan to come back, now's the time." She didn't reply. She didn't need to return the way they imagined, because she had never really left. She chose to reappear in ways they didn't expect. That Wednesday afternoon, Bailey entered the annual Emotion First Brand Building Conference in New York. It was a gathering of leading names in the industry. Some of the keynote speakers represented the top agencies in the Northeast. One name still led the lineup, Nova and Partners, her former agency. Their topic, redefining emotion in digital branding. Bailey wasn't listed as a speaker, but Mindsight had been the quiet force behind Call Her by Her Real Name, a campaign that shook social media by telling the story of an anonymous nurse who saved a patient during a storm. The video sparked a wave of public curiosity. 48 hours later, the sponsoring healthcare brand saw a surge in orders. They chose Mindsight because, as they said, kindness doesn't need a spotlight to reach 1 million hearts. No one predicted Mindsight, but everyone noticed what it had done. Bailey sat in the third row, calm and silent, as Nova and Partners delivered their keynote about insight-driven storytelling, repeating the very terms they once dismissed as naive. After the Q&A, while the scattered applause faded, a brand director approached her. "Are you behind Mindsight?" he asked. She nodded. He smiled. "I used to work with Nova, but now I want to work with people who understand real value. Can we meet tomorrow?" Bailey replied simply. "I'll bring results, not a profile." 2 weeks later, the industry press exploded. Nova and Partners lost 4 major accounts in 1 quarter. Some investment partners quietly pulled out of negotiations. No one mentioned Bailey. No one needed to. But in the background, an email landed in Mindsight's inbox. "I know it was you, and I was wrong." There was no name, but with one glance, Bailey knew. It was from Maxwell, her former CEO, the one who stayed silent when she was pushed out, the one who nodded along when others erased her work. She didn't respond. That Friday, Bailey met an old face again, Amy, her former assistant, who had been demoted for doing things Bailey's way. They sat in a small cafe in Brooklyn where the sunlight fell soft through tall windows. "Aren't you angry?" Amy asked. Bailey smiled gently. "There's no use for anger. Silence is a kind of filter, and sometimes the strongest words are the ones you never say out loud. Amy didn't speak again. She didn't need to. Bailey had never sought revenge. She only wanted to prove that she was never someone who needed to be kept. She was someone who should never have been lost. She didn't start a company to prove a point. She started it to rewrite how an agency should treat both its clients and its people. At Mindsight, every employee had the right to turn down a contract if it went against their values. Every campaign started with a simple internal conversation, not about KPIs, but about one question: who do we want this to touch? There were no rankings, no trophy shelves, only trust protected through action. One spring evening, Bailey stood on the rooftop of the building where Mindsight was based. The city below was still noisy as ever, but within her there was only calm. Her phone buzzed. A message from a new partner read, "We've chosen Mindsight to co-develop a global initiative for mental wellness. You were the first name that came to mind." Bailey closed her eyes for a breath, not out of pride, but because she knew this wasn't luck. It was the result of never giving up. On the day she was cut from her old job, she once asked herself, "Do I still have value?" She didn't need the answer anymore, because her journey had answered for her. True value doesn't come from the position you're given. It comes from how you keep standing after everything's been taken away.